you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
We're back at it again, bro. I hope the audience has missed us.
I hope so too.
I know. We just sort of just fell off the map with our last episode. Hopefully, the audience sort of knows that's our time frame. You know, basically, tax season for me gets a little hectic.
Yeah, and actually, at that time it was weird because I had placement as well, so I was gone. I was busy. You were busy, and actually, for the listeners, Joel and I, we didn't talk for what 2.5 months, maybe 2 months.
I mean, in terms of like this and calls and yeah. But I mean, obviously, we're texting back and forth, stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
barely.
Well,
I'd text you would just say no, no. Like Joel has something to say. Joel just says no.
It's like, are you ready to record? No.
You want to talk? No. Well, okay, all right. That's good, but that's all right. That's right, because maybe me and you need a break from each other as well. So
yeah, well, and hopefully the saying reigns true for our audience. You know, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So
yeah. So, but yeah, I missed it. The break is necessary, as I texted you before, Joel. Like, the break is necessary because sometimes it's nice not to talk on things. It's nice not to just let things happen and then not feel the need to jump on stuff and just sit back and watch things unfold.
Well, dude, on that, like, I was having a bit of deja vu because it was very similar to last year during our break. You know, we're going through this. We went through the third lockdown.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Because we had just started opening up, then we locked down again, and like, all this lockdown stuff just started spiraling out of control. At least in Ontario. And so it was almost like I'm glad we weren't recording because maybe we would have ended up doing too many episodes on COVID. That's what I said last year, and to some extent I sort of was wondering if that would have been the case. I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to talk about regarding COVID and things transpiring. But
as for now, in today's episode, we're talking about Cancel Canada Day. Right, so that's what we're going to be talking about. So for the listeners, just to let you know the direction we're heading into. We're going to talk about why do people want to cancel Canada Day? Does the Catholic Church owe an apology? Who was Adolphus, Egerton, Ryerson? So
I think he has something to do with Ryerson, but we'll find that out.
Yeah, he has something. Yeah, Adolphus. I don't know. Adolphus. Yeah, okay, so for those of you who don't know, and part of it too is for our U.S. listeners, and I know that we have some listeners abroad, in the Caribbean, in the U.K. What up, Uncle Mark?
Yeah, man, we got listeners all over.
International. We're international.
For our audience, if they were, hopefully they saw I was on a podcast called the Anarchist Bible Study. And I was saying, like, we actually have a pretty diverse audience. Like, I think half our listeners are American.
Yes. Yeah, which is weird.
There's some countries around the world that are listening, and they got pretty high downloads. So I'm guessing it's like one subscriber in that country. But I've always wondered if maybe some of those funky countries is just because someone's using a VPN.
Who knows?
and look like they're in that country. But
yeah, so for those of you who are not hip to what's going on. So basically the reason for canceling Canada Day was that there was 2 recent events that shocked Canadians. And so one of them was a young man in London killed a Muslim family, young white man killed a Muslim family in London with his vehicle. Yeah. And then the other one was 215 Indigenous grave sites were found in the Kamloops, BC area near a residential school. So these horrific things have definitely caused a lot of people to say, you know what, maybe this is a time to reflect and not celebrate, a time to mourn and not celebrate. And so even this even with BC, this happened in BC where they canceled a lot of Canada Day events. So even like the government is getting involved in canceling Canada Day. So when you guys will be listening to this, it'll be the day after Canada Day.
So
but it's
if
something to think about.
craziness happens regarding canceling Canada Day, we'll probably have to do a follow-up episode if there's some more developments, let's say.
Yeah, but essentially, it still looks like a goal, but people are definitely wrestling. This is the first time I've ever, thought about the idea of canceling Canada Day. Yeah, but I think the key thing is for this first part that we're gonna talk about is these two events that have brought people to mourn. The first one is the Islamophobia, and the issue is that Canadians are divided on these two issues and how they are interpreted. And so thus there would be a division on whether Canada Day should be canceled or not. So for example, with the Islamophobia, with the young white man, so some were saying that it was a what's the word? Hate speech or not hate speech.
Racist or hate
An
crime?
act of hate. Yeah, hate crime. Yeah, sorry, hate crime.
I know.
So some would say it's a hate crime. Yeah, so some would say it's a hate crime. Some would say, well, it's just a murder. We don't know if it was a racist act. But it's implied that because for some people it's implied that because he's white and the people were not, it's a racist act.
Well, it definitely fits the mainstream media narrative.
Mm.
And so I think for those of us who are, critical of mainstream media, it just causes us, perfect example is like the claim of hate crime came out like instantly. And I'll say I haven't seen, I don't know if this is the right word. I want to call it corroborating evidence. Like, where's this man's manifesto? Where's his friends talking about him being this type of hatred person? And maybe I've missed it, but I did go looking a little bit to see what's in the articles, and I really, I didn't, I thought there was just an aspect of, okay, nobody's talking about the evidence that sort of aligns with this narrative. Now, obviously, based on the devastation of what he did, I'm not trying to dismiss or downplay any of that, because obviously what he did was horrendous. And for argument's sake, assuming it was intentional and hate filled, no problem. In the sense that like I'm willing to say, yep, that's the case, and I'm not, I'm not trying to make excuses. I was just more so taken back by how like instantly it was the narrative. And I think I'll put this in the show notes page because I think Candace Malcolm touched on it perfectly with regards to this dichotomy. About I think in 2019 we had a guy who was connected with ISIS, had mental health problems, and had a I can't remember if it was like 2 or 3 people that he killed, or it might have been more. But the way the media talked about that guy is literally the polar opposites to the way we talk about this guy. And the only difference is that guy was a minority and this guy's a white guy. And so to me, that's where the issue lies. It's just a stark contrast with arguably the same type of a character, but because one of them's a white guy, the mainstream demonizes him, and the terrorist connections to ISIS are downplayed for the minority. So
yeah, but some people would say the reverse is true, that the racialized person is misrepresented, right? And then the white person is always presented in a proper light.
Well, and I would agree that that claim would probably be from a historical perspective. I think if you hold that view today while watching mainstream media, you're plugging your ears and closing your eyes.
Well, some people would say that that's their reality, right? So,
Well, again,
right, that
I'm
they
not
wouldn't say
saying
that's historical. They would say some people would say no, that's not historical, Joel. That's present. That's we still see white people being presented in the light, and people of color represented in the dark.
and so what I'm trying to say is not like I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is mainstream media, right? Any left-leaning media is not at all that way, right? Like when it comes now, at least they I'm going to sort of eat my words a little bit when I say that, because I would say, go to the Malcolm X quote where he's talking about, and I'll put it in the show notes page, it's called What Malcolm X Thought About Liberals. And he talks about white liberals. But the point is that, the mainstream narrative is very much, on the anti-racist, white privilege, criticizing white people perspective. So I don't disagree that there may be context where it's not true, but I'm saying CTV, CBC, all the Canadian news channels, CNN in the US, if you think that, the white people are being promoted on those channels, I would say, like, please send me that content, because I don't see that. I see the complete opposite. Like, if I'm wrong, if I'm ignorant, please show me. But and that's where I'm not saying what you're saying isn't right. That might be some people's reality, that they're working in a place, in a workplace where they're feeling like their boss is a racist, or they're experiencing racism or something. So in that sense, obviously I'd be ignorant to that. But when you look at the mainstream media, I mean the culture has definitely Jim Crow is not the type of thing that's going on in mainstream media, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. Of course, well, some people would disagree, but
and that's why I say, hey, send it to me. I want to see it. I want to know that those parts of, because then I'll call it out, right? Like,
yeah.
So
now, in regards to the 215 grave sites that were found in Kamloops, the people disagree on that as well. Not that it didn't happen, not that those aren't grave sites, but the context for the grave sites, because what it shows is that, well, according to True North and a National Post as well, in their posts, they mentioned that like, we don't have official report on the incident, nor preliminary findings have not been revealed, and so there wasn't necessarily a report. And when you look at the CBC, which is government backed news outlet, they put First Nations say, right? So through the CBC, they say, okay, First Nations say that 215 graves were found. So people are still waiting for it to be confirmed. So for those who don't know the details, it wasn't 215 grave sites that were dug up. So they were found through a radar, an above ground radar that's used to find oil tanks or oil barrels underground. And so what the radar does is it measures the hole in the ground. So when you dig a grave, there's a hole, and it can measure from above ground. It can measure holes in the ground, possibly grave sites or barrels or whatever the case may be. And it can also identify if there's caskets as well. So with the radar, it found 215 dug graves. And so the conclusion is that they're graves of children, because it was found next to a residential school.
Yeah, and I think this is another example where it's sort of like mainstream media jumping on a narrative, as opposed to sort of doing the research and investigating and trying to present, something that may very well may be, let's say, negative about the residential schools.
Well, and I mean this kind of information, you're definitely not going to see that. Hear those kind of the other side or the other perspective on CP24.
No, I mean, so there
any mainstream news outlet.
So what you were talking about, I think there was a preliminary report, but it wasn't public. But there was. So I have an article from True North. So First Nations Chief Roseanne Casimir, she was told reporters. So I'll read the first part. The first part says, told reporters on Friday that the remains claimed to have been discovered at a former residential school near Kamloops, British Columbia, were, and in quotation marks it says, not a mass grave. According to
what? Sorry, who said that?
The First Nations chief, speaking to reporters, told them that it's not a mass grave according to preliminary findings. Now, what's very interesting is that all we've been told how they found a mass grave. But literally the words from the First Nations chief that, if I understand correctly, is part of the investigation committee, if you want to be very general, right? The people that are creating the report with the government. She's saying it's not a mass grave, but mainstream media is telling us about this mass grave that was found. And this is, to me, where it's like, if you legitimately want to have a talk about Canada's historical, failures and whatnot, you know what? There's a conversation for that, and obviously we need to learn from history.
Yeah,
but if you're not going to get that when you listen to mainstream media, who's jumping all over something, making 10 assumptions so that they can fit it into their narrative.
I guess for me, I'm thinking that my conclusion is that Canada's already divided on this issue. We can clearly see that. And I think that from a biblical perspective, the first thing that comes to me is that Romans 12:15, weep with those who weep. Right? Yes, you can, part of good journalism is asking questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being critical. But, of course, not forgetting to weep with those who weep and being gracious and compassionate about these situations, because this is still a terrible situation, whether it's, even though it's not unfolded yet on the details on how it went down, but it's still terrible to find 215 uncovered grave sites. And so I also think about James 19:20, where it says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note to this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Does canceling Canada Day actually make an atonement for the atrocities? I would say no, right? Because the evil doesn't balance out the good that Canada has produced. And we know this is true because people still live here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And go back to our episodes. I mean, we've done a few of them now, but I don't know. It might have come from you, but the residential schools, are there's an aspect of, there's people who went to the residential schools, and succeeded, but there's also I think you said it, where they were like, there was Indigenous communities that wanted to send their kids there. Like, this was done there again. This is where, to me, it's so frustrating, because I'm sure there's a huge diversity, right? Like, some locations, the residential schools were basically kidnapping the kids, and then there's other contexts where the residential school was probably within the community in a very positive manner, because it's not like some crazy tyrant went around setting up all these schools. We're talking like 100 years ago, where it's like, the government makes a proclamation, maybe sounds like they partnered with the Catholic Church in many cases, and rolled out a program. But the people that were at those locations are going to be vastly different people. And while we can probably disagree a lot with the program that was rolled out, in terms of, what it was doing, what it wasn't doing, and all that, and that's where, go listen to our Sir John A. MacDonald episode with Brad Fott. What did I say was 36? I mean, he talks about really the situation that, Johnny MacDonald finds himself in. If you look at the alternative option was to do what the Americans did, which was to wage war on the Indians. And like, that's not what, that was what their solution was, the Americans. Let's wage war on them. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, but what was really interesting was Brad said Sir Johnny MacDonald was one of actually considered a progressive. And that's where I would say we can bring it all back around. Everybody wants solutions by government. And that's what created this in the first place. For me, go back to who was the cause and effect of this relationship. It was government. So let's get government to solve the problem. To me, that seems ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well. Now the government is blaming the Catholic Church, and Justin Trudeau said that the Catholic Church owes an apology for its role in residential schools. And there was a video of a woman in Saskatoon vandalizing a church, and she was using red paint. I guess it was, I think it's symbolic of blood, and just splattering it all over the church doors, walls, the brick, the signs. But what she was doing, she was putting her hand in the red paint, and then smudging her hands all over the door, all over the signs. Look, I guess kind of making it look like the people that the church had a hand in killing, and she vandalized the church. And I think, Joel, you sent me a post of another church being vandalized or something.
So, I mean, I've got I've got a couple articles from True North. I just was looking at it because mainstream media is probably not going to report on these too much. So the one, I think the picture, I have a vandals graffiti Vancouver Catholic Church in weekend attack dated June 15th. I have 2 Catholic churches destroyed by fire in South Okanagan, again BC, June 22nd. 2 more Catholic churches torched in British Columbia, June 26th. And I think the one I sent you today on Instagram was a different one. Actually, no, it was the 6 Buzz one. I think you had forwarded to me that one. But the point is that, like, I think for me, and I would hope that you agree, this type of response, burning down, churches today for something that happened maybe 100 years ago, and obviously I know it was ongoing. We're talking the grave though, the 215. I think was arguably could have been 100 years ago. And so what do these individual people, and I would argue, I think you would agree, this is the problem with the concept of social justice. You're not, justice is about holding the individual actors accountable for their actions. And if it's biblical, we're talking about restoration to those that are harmed. Biblical justice, I mean. Social justice, as a just blanket concept, is about people groups' injustice against each other, and anyone can pay the penalty for the sins of their people group. And to me, this is the churches being burnt down is Trudeau and the government's fault, because as you said, Trudeau's the one pointing the finger in their direction. I understand that they were involved, and there may be criticisms that belong there, but to me, Trudeau's doing what he's always doing, which is just create division in our country by pitting one group of people against each other. And people seem to like it. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess the way I'm looking at it is, I just thought to myself, I was like, well, thinking about the question, does the Catholic Church owe an apology? And I would say, do Muslims owe an apology for 9/11? Right? Do the Jews owe an apology for killing the only perfect person? The only perfect person who ever lived. Right? Do the Jews owe an apology for that? I think Trudeau and those people who are vandalizing church, I think their ecclesiology is off. In that they don't understand what the church is. Well, one, of course, the church is, has broken people in it. So, the church is not above any kind of sin. But also that there isn't, I think the main thing is that there isn't like the idea of the Pope and there being somebody who runs the church. Like there's like a king of the church, or technically Jesus is the only king and he's the head of the church. but there isn't like a formal leader to say, I apologize on behalf of of the Christian church or the Catholic church. Right? There's no one person who speaks on behalf of the church to apologize or to sign off on anything. So at that point, I was kind of like, well, yeah, Trudeau's a little bit off on that one, and anybody else who doesn't understand how these things work. So I think that's crazy. But I think one of the next thing that we have to hit on, which is uh, key, is the role of um, Adolphus Egerton Ryerson, because the way how it connects to the church is that he was also a man of faith and a churchman, and he helped orchestrate. He's the architect of the school system that we have today. So I'll just give a quick background on who he is for those of you guys who don't know, as Cole's notes for the test tomorrow, Spark notes. All right, so as superintendent of education in Canada West, Ryerson established a system of free, mandatory schooling at the primary and secondary level, the forerunner of Ontario's current school system. Ryerson believed that poverty should not be a roadblock to education and that Canada West should have a free and mandatory public education system. Canada West is Ontario. Uh, Ryerson was one of the founders of the Provincial Normal School, 1847. It was the first teachers' college in Toronto, and it later became the Toronto Teachers College and then the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, also known as OISE, OISE. Ontario gained a new accessible primary and secondary school based on these principles. So this is the guy they named the University of
Ryerson.
after.
Yeah. Interesting side note. Ryerson's, I think, one of the only schools to ever go from being a college to a university.
Say that again.
They used to be a college and they became a university.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah. So Ryerson, he helped basically build our school system that we have today, and he had a hand in putting together the residential schools. So, oh, by the way, that information I found and the information I'm going to be talking about is from the Canadian Encyclopedia. So, what do you think, Joel? What's going on?
I mean, the question becomes: are we having, similar to the Sir John A. Macdonald concept, right? And again, is there room for criticism for this individual? Sure, but I don't see things of substance on that conversation. I see very surface level associations. Cancel. Right? Again, mainstream narrative, continuing that trend. And just again, I just pose it as like, what's the argument of substance against him? If he was in an era where, like I said, Sir John A. Macdonald was sort of considered by many to be progressive in his era. Well, are we just cherry picking the individual that we're going to demonize? And I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not trying to pretend like this guy shouldn't, is I'm not saying he is someone that should be maintained as a, iconic individual or having a school named after him. But I also don't know how that actually makes a difference, right? Like, goes back to all of this stuff with regards to, the 215. Okay, let's jump on that. Let's show our virtue. We agree that this was evil. Like, that's all I've seen. It's just like virtue signaling. It's funny. I have a podcast that I listen to. I'll put in the show notes page. Called the title of the podcast was called Grandstanding: The Use and Abuse of Moral Talk. And I sort of summarized what their point was, that a lot of our virtue signaling, / moral outrage is literally performance art. And the reason I call it performance art is because that is the extent of how much people care. They just want to tell other people that they care, they agree this was wrong, and that's it. They think they've actually done something of substance by staking in their ground. Look at me, I'm so virtuous because I agree with the current moral trend.
I see where you're coming from. I guess for me, when I'm looking at this, and especially me, going into the education profession, I find this guy pretty fascinating
Hmm.
From an education perspective, right? Because there's a part where it says he he toured. So in 1844, Ryerson was appointed superintendent of education for Canada West. He held this post until 1876. In 1844 and 1845, he toured Europe to study different school systems. Based on his findings, he wrote his report on a system of public elementary instruction for Upper Canada. In this report, he made recommendations for improvements to the educational system. Many of his points were adopted in the first two Common Schools Acts. And so what I see here is a guy who cares about the learning of young people. And he sounds like he's a really knowledgeable guy. And he knows what he's doing in regards to look at us now, right? We're still operating in the system he created. So school being named after him was the least they can do for what he's done. But I think when I'm looking at the Indigenous issue in the 215 graves, it's terrible. And I think that I think it's okay in changing the Ryerson University name. I think that's okay to do that. But I think a serious conversation has to be had about putting the past on trial, or as I always say, presentizing the past. And so I don't think there's adequate proof that he had that he hated Indigenous people, but there is overwhelming proof that he loved them and that they loved him.
Wow.
So in 1825, he became a Methodist missionary. He rode on horseback on the York and Yonge Street circuits and lived as a missionary at the Credit River, now known as Mississauga. There he worked and lived alongside the Ojibwe people. He learned to speak the language and became a respected teacher in that community. He befriended the Kakawaganabe, which is known as Sacred Feathers, the Kakanagawabe people. And the person who came out of that community was this guy named Peter Jones, and he's the first Indigenous Methodist missionary. Right, so he gets a cosign from him. And then in 1826, at a council meeting, Ryerson received the Ojibwe name Chikachok, which is bird on a wing.
Okay.
Does this? No, Joel, I'm not finished.
Okay.
Does this sound like a guy who's going to sign off on children being murdered?
It does not. It definitely sounds like sort of what I said. A surface level association is the reason he's being proposed for canceling.
Yo, they destroyed this guy's statue. Yo, I shouldn't be laughing, but like, yo, statues, we see statues all the time. Statues are heavy. Statues are like strong and sturdy, and they tore that dude's head off like he was real. Like they tore the head off of that statue. Right? You know what I mean? So the hate towards him, I don't think is warranted. And I think, yes, I'm all for fighting justice. I'm all for, you know, making
Make
amends
amends.
make amends and setting things right. But I think there has to be an academic and scholarly conversation about history 101, right? And really sitting down and saying, okay, well, who was Ryerson? Oh, he was just a too pale, too stale, too male, right? And the conversation's over, right? But as opposed to looking at this guy's body of work, for people who don't know what a missionary is, right? Jesus Christ gives a command to Christians to go and be missionaries and go and make disciples of all nations. And the best way to make disciples and to convert people is you love them to death. You love them to death. You can't. We don't have conversion by the sword. That's conversion by the. We don't. That's not a thing. That's that's not a thing. We don't do that. Like Jesus taught this from even then. You love people to death. You love them, and you be amongst the people. You go into their community, and you try to accommodate yourself to their situation, and that's what he learned to speak the language. I can't even speak French.
Yep.
I failed grade 4 French. Actually, and all the way through. I took it all the way through. I don't know why I did that. Grade 9. But anyways.
I got the French award in grade 8, but that's because I could conjugate verbs.
Okay. Right.
I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, but the point is, he loved those people that he was breaking bread with in Mississauga. And, Peter Jones, you can look him up. First Indigenous Methodist missionary. Vouch for this guy. So that's what all I'm saying is let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not as my wife would say, let's not hype up the situation. Right? Let's not gas it up and really try to walk through what's going on. But let me ask you this, Joe. What's your 2 cents?
I think, the last time we talked about this, when it was just me and you, I think I made the comment, something to the effect of it's like, this is only talked about when something pops up, right? So the graves pop up, it shows, and then, it's going to fall, I would say it's going to fall out of trend for the government. They're going to move on to something else, and nothing is going to change. What's her, the girl, the episode we did with, and I think her last name is Widowson. I always can't remember her first name. Frances Widowson. She talked about how it just turns into this money grab with the lawyers take money, and there's this fake 2-state solution that could never exist, but they use it as a fuel for preventing actual change. And let me give you the prime example of what the government did to demonstrate this. There was a bill, C5, that got passed. Did you know September 30th is now the annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation?
I didn't know that.
But guess what? Only federal employees get to take that holiday.
Really? I didn't know that.
So, only federal employees and workers in federally regulated workplaces, such as banks and railways. So it's not one of the, let's say countrywide statutory holidays. It's only one of the bank holidays. And to me, this is a prime example. Just like the land acknowledgements are something that has show, it's of zero substance, right? If you really want to make a change, for the community, stop looking into the past, and unless you're trying to identify a cause of a problem, and start looking at what their needs are today. That was the beauty of what you were talking about, him being the missionary. The Christian community, that missionary concept is go into their community, find out what their needs are, and serve them. But none of that is actually being proposed. It's more money, more land acknowledgements. Like those aren't clear. Like if you think those are going to solve the problems, you're just ignoring the past, because they've gotten lots of money. They've gotten lots of payments. That's not helping. And so until somebody really wants to look at the actual underlying causes of, the inequality in their communities, or why their communities are rampant with some problems. I shouldn't say not all the communities, but a lot of communities have, drug and alcohol abuse, significant suicide. These problems are, in their community, and absolutely it's, fertile ground for missionaries or people to go and serve them. But that's, this is what frustrates me, is like people jump on the, performative virtue bandwagon, or the demonize the oppressor being the church bandwagon, but they don't want to do anything to help anyone. They just want to be on the right side of morality.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What's your 2 cents on all this canceling of Canada Day?
Yeah, I'd say canceling Canada Day is impossible. Full stop. That just shows the extremism of cancel culture, that they thought that the idea of canceling Canada's birthday. Like, think about it. The only people who could cancel a birthday is God and mom. Right? But think about it. But God is merciful. Mom is not. I've been 11 years old for 2 years. 2 years in a row. 2 years because of bad behavior. Right? Like you can't cancel a birthday. That's just not a thing. Like, let's get back to basics and think things through, talk things through, read up on history, have a conversation between two historians in a public sphere where people can watch and dialogue and learn.
Learn. I was waiting for that word. Learn.
Right? Whether it's history in the past or history in the present, with current events, with these current events of the Islamophobia in the residential schools, right? That's present day history, right? But either way, we have to look at both sides of the conversation and have it that way. That's my 2 cents, and that's the bottom line. As Darnell said so.
And yeah, it's I wish there was some hope from all of this, but I really don't see it. I just see more of the same coming. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, so many people need to just have the desire to learn. Like, that's where this, the social justice conversation, some of that stuff, there's value in that part, right? Let's have dialogue. Let's learn. Let's understand each other. Let's stop demonizing particular sides. Let's stop calling people oppressors, and take the free market approach, which is exchange voluntarily, interact voluntarily. It's a lot harder for you to, use your vehicle for homicide when you actually know people and you meet them. So,
let us know what you guys think.
Yeah, give us your 2 cents. Let us know if there's an aspect of this issue we're not touching on. I think this is probably 5th episode, technically, if you want to call it that, on the Indigenous topic, or Indigenous people and the topics that surround them. But I think this is an issue that is so deep that we probably only have touched the surface on. And
so let us know what you guys think.
Point us in the direction of maybe the next episode.
Yeah. And you can contact us at sixcentsreport@gmail.com. If you're trying to get in touch with me, it's DoGoodDarnell, DOGUDA_Darnell on Twitter and on Instagram, and then Darnell Samuels on Facebook.
And I'm TJoelN39 everywhere. Yeah, give us your 2 cents.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.